If a stranger should happen to travel to the tiny little town, and perhaps quite by accident find he has wandered too far in one direction, he would see Villa Villekulla. Not that the house was much to look at, being quite an old and run-down sort of house, sitting in quite an old and overgrown garden, but the stranger might stop anyway and wonder who owned it. Naturally, all the people living in the tiny little town knew who lived in Villa Villekulla, and they also knew why there was a horse on the veranda. But someone coming from anywhere else wouldn't know that, of course, so he would probably wonder. Especially if it was getting very late and was practically dark, and he had caught sight of a little girl striding around the garden, even though it was so late, not looking at all as if she was thinking of going to bed. He would be bound to think, "I wonder why that little girl's mother hasn't told her it's bedtime. Every other child is in bed by now, that's for sure." For how would the visitor know that the little girl didn't have a mother? She didn't have a father either, for that matter, at least not one who was at home. Quite simply, she lived there all alone in Villa Villekulla. Well, perhaps not really all alone, to be absolutely accurate, because her horse lived on the veranda. And she had a monkey, too, called Mr. Nilsson. But naturally, anyone visiting the town wouldn't know anything about that. If the little girl walked to the front gate, and it was very probable she would, because she liked chatting with people, he'd have the chance of getting a proper look at her. And no doubt he couldn't help thinking, "That is the freckliest, most red-haired child I have ever seen." And then he might think, "Actually, it's really nice to be freckly and red-haired, at least if you look as if you're bursting with life the way this child does." He might be interested to know the name of the freckly red-haired girl skipping around in the twilight. And if he happened to be standing beside the gate, all he had to do was ask, "What's your name?" And the answer, in a very bright and chirpy voice, was likely to be, "My name is Pippi Victoriaria T. Cozy Appleminta Ephraim's daughter Longstocking, daughter of Captain Ephraim Longstocking, former terror of the high seas, and now a South Sea Island king, but I'm called Pippi for short." Yes, that's right. The girl was none other than Pippi Longstocking. And if she said her dad was a South Sea Island king, then that's what she believed. For her dad had once been blown overboard and disappeared when he and Pippi were sailing the oceans. And because Pippi's dad was rather fat, she was positively convinced he hadn't drowned. Very likely he had floated ashore on an island and become king of all the Koratut people. And that's precisely what Pippi thought. It might happen that the visitor had plenty of time and wasn't in any hurry to catch a train that evening, in which case he would stop and chat with Pippi for a while, and eventually realize that she did live in Villa Villekulla all alone, apart from a horse and a monkey. And if the visitor was kind-hearted, he probably couldn't help thinking, "What does the poor child live on exactly?" But he most definitely shouldn't trouble himself about that. "I'm as rich as a mountain troll," Pippi always said. And she was. She had a whole traveling bag full of golden coins her dad had given her. So the visitor needn't think Pippi went without anything. She managed extremely well, despite not having a mum or a dad. Except, of course, there was no one to tell her when it was bedtime. But Pippi had found a good way. She told herself.